All right, we're continuing where we left off on the final exam review for Math 110. Number 20, it says, given that f of x is 2x minus 6, determine the equation of the inverse function, f inverse of x. All right, so we have f of x equals 2x minus 6, and we want f inverse of x. First, notice that that is not the reciprocal. For numbers, the -1 power means reciprocal, but for functions, it's something else. It means the inverse operations in the opposite order. So to get that, you want to first write this as y equals 2x minus 6, and then switch the x and the y. In other words, replace y with x and replace x with y. That's where you're actually going to the inverse function right there. It's the idea of switching the variables. Then we need to write this in terms of y. So solve for y, which means we need to add 6 to both sides. So we get x plus 6 equals 2y, and then divide both sides by 2 to get x plus 6 all over 2. And you can leave it like that, equals y, or you could divide both of those by 2 and get x over 2, or 1/2 x, same thing, plus 6 over 2, or 3. So y is 1/2 x plus 3. Either one of these forms is fine, and then you just want to write that as f inverse. So x plus 6 all over 2, or f inverse of x is 1/2 x plus 3. All right, number 21. If a one-to-one function has domain -3 to infinity and range 2 to infinity, what will be the domain and range of the inverse function? All right, well, this just goes along with the fact that the variables are switched, and the domain is the set of x values. So that will be the range of the function. The domain of the inverse is going to be the range of the original function. So that will be 2 to infinity. All right, because the x values for this function correspond to the y values of the original function. Similarly, the range of the inverse function is going to equal the domain of the original function, -3 to infinity. All right, so just switch them. Just like when we found the inverse function here, we switched the variables. X's and y's are switched, domains and ranges are switched. Number 22. Use the definition of inverses to determine if f of x equals 1/2 x plus 4 and g of x equals 2x minus 8 are inverses. A little bit of a typo there. They should say to determine if they are inverses. All right, so we're looking at f of x equals 1/2 x plus 4 and g of x equals 2x minus 8. The definition of inverses is basically that they undo each other, inverse operations in the opposite order, that if you put a value into one function and take what you get and put it into the other function, you get the original number back. In general, that means f of g of x, the composition function, is just x. And it works in both ways, both orders. So g of f of x is also x. So you check each of those. First of all, f of g would be putting the g function, 2x minus 8, into the f function. And the f function is 1/2 times x plus 4. So we put in 2x minus 8 for x. Distribute the 1/2. Half of 2x is x. Half of minus 8 is minus 4. And then plus 4, sure enough, gives you x. Over here, g of f of x means take g of the f function, 1/2 x plus 4. G of 1/2 x plus 4 means plug that in for x in the g function. So 2 times that, minus 8. 2 times 1/2 x plus 4 goes in the parentheses. 2 times 1/2 is 1x. 2 times -4 is -8. And that should be actually a plus. Right? When you see that it doesn't cancel out, you have to look back and see what happened. Okay, f of x was 1/2 x plus 4. Let's write that correctly. F of x is 1/2 x plus 4, 1/2 x plus 4. So that's x plus 8. And then -8, sure enough, gives you x back. So we have basically proved that those are inverses of each other. All right, number 23. Solve by factoring. 2x squared minus 7x plus 6 equals 0. All right, so this should factor. First, you make sure that it's set equal to 0 like it is. Set up your parentheses. Basically, we want to unfoil this. So the first terms have to multiply to give together to give you 2x squared. So they have to be 2x and x. And then the last terms have to multiply together to give you a positive 6. So those are going to have the same sign to have a positive product. And then they have to combine the inside and outside to give you a -7. So the only way that can happen is if they're both negative. And then to get 6, you've got options of either 2 and 3 or 6 and 1. So if you look at those options, like say try 2 and 3. First of all, we can't put a 2 here because that would mean that 2 would factor out, but 2 doesn't factor out there. So that's impossible. So if we use 2 and 3, 3 is going to have to go there, and 2 would have to go over here. So now we check. What do we have on the inside? -3x. What do we have on the outside? -4x. Does that combine to give you -7x in the middle? Sure does. If it didn't, we would go to try 6 and 1. But those are the correct factors. So then when you have a product equal to 0, there's a special property of having 0 on one side, and that says that one of those factors has to be 0. I mean, think about it. If you have two numbers that give you 0, when you multiply them, that's only going to happen if either the first one is 0 or the second one is 0. So you set them each equal to 0 and then solve those equations. Here you'd add 3 to both sides and divide by 2. Here you'd add 2 to both sides. So x is 2 or x is 3/2 are your solutions. Number 24. Solve 3x squared minus 13x minus 10 by factoring. Minus 10 equals 0, sorry. Yeah, it has to be an equation. 3x squared minus 13x minus 10 equals 0. So again, we've got 0 on one side, that's important. And then to get 3x squared, it's going to have to be 3x and x. And these ones where the leading coefficient is not 1 are a little bit harder. You have to just kind of do trial and error. You can't do it as quickly as when the coefficient is 1. You can just kind of look at these two numbers and figure it out, but not so much when the coefficient is 3. You have to just try. Pairs that will give you a -10 would have to be positive and negative, either 2 and 5 or 1 and 10. So I'll try the 2 and the 5, and you just plop them down and see what you get when you FOIL. In particular, what you get on the inside and what you get on the outside. And once again, looks like I got lucky. Again, if you don't get it, first off, you can switch the numbers around, you can switch the signs around, and you can try the other pair. But once you get it so that it works, make sure that you have the factors right, in that the first terms give you the first term here, the last two, the numbers, multiply together to give you the number here, including the signs. Positive times negative is negative. And the inside and outside combinations add to give you the middle term. Then you can set each factor equal to 0. 3x plus 2 equals 0, or x minus 5 equals 0. And here, subtract 2 from both sides and divide by 3 to get x equal 2/3. Over here, just add 5 to get x equal 5.